Uno y adelante.
Muy buenos días.
Good morning. It is an honor to be able to greet you today and to welcome you to the webinar on the situation of rural women in agri-food systems. My name is Catalina Ivanovic, and I will be in charge of moderating this event. Now, before actually starting, I would like to remind you that we have simultaneous interpretation available in English, Spanish, and Portuguese. You will find the possibility of connecting to interpretation on the globe icon that you have at the bottom of your screens. We would also we would like to thank all of those who are attending and their interest in the situation on rural women and the advancements that have been made on gender equality. We have asked people to participate in this virtual connection. Governments, the academia, civil organizations, indigenous population communities, in order to learn a little more about this global report, which talks about the situation of rural women. And that is why the objective that brings us together today is checking this report, reviewing it, reflecting upon it, and identifying progress and challenges regarding the situation of rural women. I would also like to ask you to write your comments and your questions in the chat pod of the virtual streaming, and we will address those towards the end of the event. So in order to begin, I would like to invite Maya Takagi, regional leader from the FAO Regional Office for Latin American and the Caribbean, to give us the welcoming words. So Maya, the floor is yours. Good morning, all of those who are present, but also to those who are connected online. It is a pleasure to welcome Mr. Benjamin Davis and also from UN Women representatives in order to address this important topic, this new report that was launched by FAO 2 weeks ago, shedding some light on the topic, this persistent topic of inequalities that exist, not only in rural areas in the agricultural sector, but with new data also, which again shed some light on the situation existing in the agri-food systems. That is to say, aside from what we know in the fact the agricultural sector, women are still lagging behind in terms of food security and poverty, especially rural poverty, women are still lagging behind. They do not have the same rights guaranteed. And when we open these up towards a broader system, when we look at production, processing, trading, and consumption, this can also be seen. The same reality can also be seen. So the importance of this report then is updates us on this report. It calls our attention. It calls the attention of our governments, our partners, and the international community to be aware that there is still a lot to be done in order to achieve the SDGs. We are in the middle of the regional Sustainable Development Forum, and one of the main messages by ECLAC is that the SDG that is lagging behind is precisely this one on equality, because historically it's the way that it has been for the region. And it's not only about this report, but if we're able to remove the gender gaps, the impact on the economy and the impact on food security would be dramatic, because gender inequality is precisely one of the sources of inequality. So looking at the whole agri-food system and how it is a part of this whole chain is something that is critical for us as an organization, as the United Nations, in order to continue showing evidence on the situation. And it's not only about showing evidence in terms of the reality that we're going through, but also trying to have options for policies in order to address this situation. Where do we need to pay attention? Access to land, rural extension, access to funding, empowering of women so that they can have decision-making power within their families and within the community association, decent work, consumption decisions. So all of this is brought by with this report. And I only wanted to just give you the welcoming words because it is Benjamin Davis who will be showing us this global view. And also what we want to do in the region is how is this reflected throughout the region, because we know that there is a gap on food security, which is tremendous. So I will leave my opening and welcoming words here, and I want to thank you all for being with us, and I will hand it over to Catalina again. Thank you very much. Well, thank you, Maya. And now, Mr. Benjamin Davis, a director of the Inclusive Rural Transformation and Gender Equality Division from FAO, will share with us the main report from the Global Report, the situation of women in agri-food systems. Benjamin, the floor is yours. Well, thank you very much, Catalina and Maya, for this introduction. And I want to thank you also for having invited me to share this report here in the region. And I want to highlight that this is a work that is based on collaboration with other institutions and organizations, UN Women, for example, also with the gender platform from the CGIAR, but also with quite a consultative process with women's organizations from different parts of the world. We have taken on the responsibility of the final results, which is work that was achieved through consensus with a lot of input from many women's organizations from many different places around the world. Secondly, I'm here presenting this global report. I'm going to share with you the global results, but also trying to give a special focus on Latin America. We have the presentation and the executive summary has been translated, and we will soon have the full report translated into Spanish too. So we have also briefs for policies for each of the regions, focused on the region so that it can be distributed and that it becomes more relevant for the region too. But this is in process, and this is what we're going to be doing with some of the regional partners, with FAO. Now, in order to begin, here we go. This in 2010 and 2011, we had the state of food agriculture on the state of women in agriculture, which really is a milestone in terms of documenting the status of women in agriculture. And it was a report that was extremely important. And since then, many changes have taken place, in the world and in the context of women too. First, in terms of the MDGs and SDGs, there is a global consensus on the interdependence of the development goals, underscoring the importance of addressing gender equality in a broader approach to sustainable and economic and social development. There's also greater attention being paid to gender equality in agricultural leadership and policy making, development, and humanitarian interventions. And also, there is a shift from a focus on women in agriculture to a broader focus on agri-food systems in the context of the dynamic processes of agricultural, rural, and structural transformation. So I will take a few minutes to describe how the context has changed, and then I will go into the results themselves. First of all, let's try and place this discussion within an agri-food systems that are dynamic and changing in time. So let us remember that most of the employment for women and also for men in low-income countries is in agri-food systems, specifically in agricultural production. And these agri-food systems are still the main driver of economies, especially in the low-income countries. But as economies develop, the proportion of men and women working in agri-food system decreases, as you can see on the first graph at the top, which has on the vertical the percentage of employment and on the horizontal the GDP per capita. And this decreases as the countries become more developed, especially agricultural employment. And the darker dots are women and the lighter dots are women. Now, within agri-food systems, the composition does change in time from agricultural to non-agricultural activities within the agri-food systems, including transportation, processing, distribution, storage, and marketing. And you can see that on the two graphs at the bottom. On the left is the percentage of in agriculture, and on the right is the percentage on non-agricultural activities within the agri-food systems. And we can also see that men have a higher tendency to be in the agricultural systems and women in the non-agricultural activities. We're going to see that later on. Also, this report is based on going from agri-food systems to agri-food systems with a gender perspective. And this requires to consider how the elements, the demographic, technology, political, all of these demographic effects are conditioned by structural inequalities linked to gender and to social and economic differentiation. It's very important to keep this in mind so that we can analyze what's shown here in the report. We can also see that the crises and vulnerabilities have an important impact. On chapter 5 in the report, we focus on three main risks: COVID-19, climate change, and conflicts. At the center are the structural inequalities linked to gender and also social and economic differences at the individual or structural level. Chapters 3, we look at the we address inequalities in access to control over goods, resources, services, and information. In chapter 4, addresses women's agencies, gender and social norms and policies, and governance. And these links between elements of agri-food systems and the drivers of change, as well as the individual, formal and informal structural changes has an influence in the outcomes. In chapter 2, we address the implications for economic and livelihood outcomes. And in chapter 4, we address the nutritional results, gender equality, and women's empowerment. The report is also based on shifting the change from gender gaps to promoting transformative gender change. And policies have shifted from closing gender gaps to adopting more gender transformative approaches, explicitly addressing formal and informal structural constraints to inequality and more balanced power relations. Also, the gender transformative approaches involve moving beyond interventions that focus on singular areas of constraint in order to address the underlying constraints and to build positive, equitable, and non-discriminatory gender norms and roles. Also, we go from equality in economic activities to equality in gender and women's empowerment, both objectives in themselves, but also as a means to improve the well-being outcomes. So we focus on three interrelated areas: resources, action capacity, and achievements. And the chapter examines these three areas in chapters 2, 3, and 4 in order to monitor progress towards women's empowerment. Also, quite important is the intersectionality approach and the importance of adding to the analysis factors like age, gender, ethnicity, health, disability, socioeconomic, and marital status, and how all of these elements are combined in order to create different modes of discrimination, and the importance of including that as part of the gender equality analysis and women's empowerment. The report also highlights the nature that is intertwined of social and economic dimensions of women's and men's lives, that these two cannot be separated, using as an example throughout the whole resort the example of gender-based violence. And also, it is important to highlight that the focus that we have adopted in this report is thanks to the increased availability of gender disaggregated data. It is important to highlight that it's not the case, though, for Latin America and the Caribbean. It's more for the sub-Saharan Africa. So this includes more qualitative studies, disaggregated, gender disaggregated data, including insecurity, employment, and access to finance and the digital services. That is globally speaking. Also, the establishment of the SDGs and their indicators has promoted a greater availability of country-level data on key dimensions of women's empowerment, such as access to land. Also, the national household and labor force surveys have improved the availability of sex disaggregated data and gender statistics, and that is where Latin America lags behind. Along with a large increase in projects and surveys specifically on households with a primary focus on gender equality and women's empowerment. There is a lot more data then to work with. Also, there is strong increase in evidence on gender equality and women's empowerment in the agri-food systems. So, I've also mentioned then the structure of the report already, and I'm not going to go into more detail. I just want to say that in chapter 6, we also highlight what has worked in terms of policies in order to improve the role of women in agri-food systems in practice, and we recommend actions for the future. Very well then, let's go into the results. I will address 6 points, and within each one, I will add some details to the data that underpin these points. First, the agri-food systems are a major employer of women and men. So worldwide, 36% of working women are employed in agri-food systems, together with 38% of men. In general, the agri-food systems are a greater source of livelihood for women and for men in low and middle-income countries. Examples, 66% of working women in sub-Saharan Africa and 71% of women in South Asia are employed in agri-food systems. And as you can see in the graph, there has been a decrease in time since 2005 to 2016, both for women as well as for men in terms of employment.
As to Latin America and the Caribbean, 25% women are working in agri-food systems, accounting for a 29% drop in 2005. Most are working outside agriculture, most in agri-food systems. So 71% of women working in the agri-food systems are employed in non-agricultural jobs compared to 44% of men. So this is the non-agricultural portion of the systems, which is the most important portion for women. Share in non-agricultural jobs has remained constant throughout the regions in the world, both for men and women. That's the lighter color, which remains constant over time, while the brown color shows a drop, which is agricultural jobs. This is broken down by subregions. In Central America, an even greater percentage of women are working in agri-food system, are working in non-agricultural sector, 84% versus 43% of men. Now, share of women in agricultural activities globally has dropped in most countries during the last 20 years. That's agricultural activities. So there is little evidence for this feminization of agriculture, yet there is heterogeneity at a regional and a national level, as well as over time. And in fact, as we see here, share of women in agricultural activities has grown in Latin America, which is related, we believe, to the male migration prevalence. This is something to underline. Also, at the global level, men are working more hours than women in agri-food systems, meaning that women have less chances than men to working full-time in agri-food systems in all regions. This is for Latin America, which is similar to other regions. And this is due to the fact that female jobs is part-time and or irregular. Point two, labor conditions for women in the agri-food systems are not, yes, oh, okay, are not egalitarian. So despite the fact of the importance it has for their means of life, the women's role is marginal and their labor conditions are worst, irregular, informal, part-time, low skills, labor intensive, and more vulnerable. For productivity of land, the difference is 24%. And here, let me say that we have 3 countries that were part of the country. On average, women are making 82 cents to a dollar earned by men. Colombia, it's part of this study. Discrimination accounts for most of the salary differences and productivity differences. Gender inequalities in household jobs and non-paid jobs will limit job opportunities. The difference is that on average, women spend 4.2 hours per day, while men like 2 hours per day, which is also true in Latin America, which is shown in red here. Same inequality in terms of unpaid care activities. Access of women to assets and resources is lower than of men. So it's really alarming how little gaps have been closed in the last few years in terms of the access of women to dissemination, irrigation, and property of cattle. And we are closing, though, the gaps to access to technology and funding. Men own more land than women in 40 out of 46 countries reporting as part of the SDG. Four of these countries are in Latin America. On the left means that men own more land. Let me go quickly here. Over half of the countries in the region reporting on SDG 582 have a low legal protection for rights of women to land here, which is quite similar to the situation in the other regions. Gender gaps in the use of internet in the Americas is the lowest of all regions, but there's lots of heterogeneity. In some countries, gaps are big. Rural women have less likelihood of owning a mobile phone, 16% in Guatemala, for instance. Social rules and standards affecting women and girls are at the center of gender inequality. Social norms take time to change. In most countries, people believe that children suffer when mothers work. In many countries, being wife is still acceptable. And in terms of documents and policies, many acknowledge the challenges of women, but very little have policy goals related to their protection. And this is just an example in terms of legal access of men and women to economic opportunities. Latin America is doing quite successfully, but as you can see, there's still lots of gender discrimination. Green, the darker green, are higher rates of discrimination. As I said, there are two Latin American countries in the sample about wife battering. It's really unacceptable in those two countries. But when we look at whether young children suffer when mothers work, there are like 5 countries, which is quite similar to other countries. Increasing gender equality and women empowerment has it's critical, has a positive impact on food security, infant nutrition. Yet there are little studies in Latin America. Most of them are in sub-Saharan Africa. There's little evidence. COVID had a much greater impact on women at a global level. 22% of women lost their jobs in the non-agricultural jobs compared to 2% of men. As you know, impact on food insecurity, it went from 1.7 to 4.3 percentage points. Now, looking at Latin America, 23% of women lost their jobs in agri-food systems versus 15.5% of men. So there again, it's true here in Latin America. Impact was even greater in South America, where nearly 1/3 of women lost their jobs in agri-food systems compared to 20% in the case of men. This COVID impact was even greater in Latin America, as Maya said, and in Latin American countries, there's a lot of red, where the impact is even stronger for women compared to men. So most Latin America, Mesoamerica, South America, that's the situation. Okay, 6 aspects of policies. First, transformative gender approaches are profitable and may change social norms of discrimination at the local level. Closing the gaps in land ownership shows benefits for employment, investment, natural resource management, access to services, so on and so forth. Lots of impacts, this ownership of land. access to formal care services has a positive impact on employment and revenues of mothers and agri-food systems. Group approaches are important to increase empowerment and resilience, and social protection may increase employment of women and improve resilience. One last slide. This is a call to action. First, the importance of investing in research and quality data broken down by gender, age, and other dimensions of social and economic differentiation. I would say that's particularly relevant for Latin America, where we haven't had the same progress as in the case of other regions. Two, scale intervention to close asset and resource gaps. We could increase the world GDP by 1% and provide food security to 45 million people, but just by closing this gap of salaries and productivity. Last but not least, intervention should be intentional and focused on empowerment. And that if we were to change projects so as to have an explicit focused on transformation, we might increase the revenues of 58 million more people and the resilience of 235 million people. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Benjamin,
Thank you, Benjamin, for this presentation of the report. That's important information for the region, of course. Let me now open for government, civil society to provide their inputs on their views in terms of progress, challenges as to the situation of rural women in the region. So let me welcome Maria da Conceição Dantas Moura. She's the Secretary of Rural Women of the Ministry of Farming and Family Farming from Brazil. So if you help us with the connection, thank you.
Maria José, você pode falar?
Eu não sou Maria da Conceição, eu sou Maria José.
We have Maria José Moraes, not Maria da Conceição Dantas Moura. So we'll go back to Maria da Conceição. So we will now listen to Maria José Moraes Costa Macé. She's the Secretary of Rural Women from Family Farming Contact and General Coordinator of Marcha das Margaridas. Maria José.
Muito obrigada.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Can you hear me okay? Can you see my screen? Please go ahead. Thank you. First of all, let me greet Maya, FAO, Benjamin, all of you that were already presenting, and Maria da Conceição, which is the Assistant Secretary, which I hope will be in the session later on. I'm Maria José. I'm a family farmer. I'm the National Secretary of Women for Contact, which is a confederation of rural workers and family farmers with the 25 federations and over 4,000 unions of workers, rural workers. I'm the coordinator of large marches in Brazil, known as the Marcha das Margaridas. Let me share with you about this. Let me thank FAO for the invitation to share the situation and conditions of women in agri-food systems today. Today, we've listened to Benjamin on such a key and critical topic for us. It is important to listen to those comments and having that information because we know this is a challenge. Having access to that information is not easy. That's why this is key. Um, we need to talk about this, and it is not enough for us women not having a guarantee on our rights. So this report and all those information as part of this report, it's critical. These data from this report emphasize something what we have always said. Every day for us, there is a clear gender inequality, not only in Brazil, but everywhere. That is why we know we need to provide visibility and value what we do, which is a critical work to provide sustainability for life and the planet. That's why we believe us, women, workers, family, farmers, we can no longer work in such poor conditions with such low salaries in our countries. We women out in the field protecting trees and forests, we need to be known, we need to be valued and respected and treated with equality. We need to put value on the guardians and protectors of health. We work in the production of food that will feed our family. We play a critical role in the preservation of biodiversity, and we also contribute to have food sovereignty and security of our population. No doubt, we need to do a lot more around family farming. That's why government need to implement public policies that should be specific so that women can access to land, water, access to funding, technical assistance, markets, and many other resources which are critical for strengthening production of foodstuffs. We need to bear in mind all the connections of the system. Also need to think on the preparation of healthy food. Women out in the field dealing with forests and with food security. We always have to work on defense because that's the only way to guarantee real food, which will come to the table of people and the body of people. We need to think of building socio-environmental practices based not only in the relationship between humans and nature, but also in acknowledging diversity of individuals and how they live, and also bearing in mind inequality and the other forms of violence out there. We believe this is possible, aware of the focal education on food health, facing large ultra-processed food companies. And let me close by saying the 2030 agenda of SDGs urgently require a new production, distribution, and consumption system resilient to climate change, fighting of inequalities, hunger, and poverty. And in this Marcha das Margaridas, There is a principle which is offering proposals to governments to build new bases for governance consistent with the principle equality of feminist principles related to solidarity of fair distribution of jobs, and we believe and fight for a democratic, just, equalitarian society, for a healthy life with agroecology, food security, for healthy territories, public policies for the development of production systems based on environmental sustainability, social justice, respect of social and territorial mixes, and the realization of work by women in agroecology, as well as best practices for the production of healthy foodstuff to guarantee food security and nutritional security. Once again, I'd like to thank FIO for the invitation, for the time, and for this debate, this discussion on this report, which provides important information for our day-to-day work. Thank you very much. That's right. Lots to be done on rural women in the region. Next, Luz Aro. She's the Executive Secretary of the Latin American Network of Rural Women. Luz, floor is yours.
Yo no sé si estoy en el aire. Buen día, querida
Okay, can
Mariana.
you hear me? Yes, you are connected and we can hear you perfectly. Okay, well, thank you very much. I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart that you've given us the opportunity to be with you through this virtual connection in the morning. We're almost closing the fifth Latin American meeting here in Coyhaique, in the Chilean Patagonia. We have gotten together here since the 23rd, women from 16 countries to talk about our problems, to try and find the possible solutions, and to see who we have to establish partnerships with in order to have a better life. And that's why the thematic topics of REDLAC and the political agenda, production and work that brings us together with FAO. Thank you so much to the executive directors all the way from Rome down to Chile, because I want to say that these thematic topics that start precisely with land production work have a lot to do with the SDGs 1 and 2, and also number 5, and maybe even 17 that talks about strategies. For us, all of the enthusiasm, all of the effort that rural women have undertaken is important. We would also like to thank the international cooperation that has allowed for several women to come to this event for the first time leaving their country. And that really is very enthusiastic for us. Many women from 16 different countries have come together to make this call to our FAO friends. Since it's an entity that supports the development and the growth of agricultural, they must also channel the decade of rural women before the American state organization, because we do not want to be forced to go to the large cities and stop producing. We have provided fresh foods for nature, for natural resources, and that is why we're asking you, dear authorities here present, and those who are listening to us through the digital means, that must join the cause of rural women in Latin America and the Caribbean and the world too. Thank you so much for allowing us to be here. Thank you for whatever you can do from Rome and from any other location in the world, because it's only fair that we women continue working the land, but with quality goods goods and services so that we can truly say that no one will be left behind. We do not want our humble women to die without knowing that they have rights. Thank you and good day. Thank you, Luz. We want to thank you and all the team that has enabled the connection today. Maria da Conceição is having some connection difficulties, and that is why, unfortunately, she will not be able to join us today. We do send her our warm greetings, and we thank her for her commitment and her intention to participate, although there are often internet issues and technical bugs. So we would like to invite Maria Noel Baeza, Regional Director of UN Women for the Americas and the Caribbean, to provide us her vision on the challenges in terms of women's equality and in the rural sector. Maria Noel, the floor is yours. Thank you, Catalina. I want to thank everybody, welcome everybody. It is a pleasure to be with you here, former Regional Director of FAO, and you are a big benchmark for all of us, a role model, not also with your famous programs during Lula, when Lula was president, but when you were regional director, general director, and always very open to gender-related topics and FAO. This is one of the things that we see from UN Women. And now with Mario leading the regional office, well, we were with him on Monday, so that with the new regional director, we were able to establish this strategic alliance. So thank you for all of your support. It is a pleasure, really, to be here and to take a look at this wonderful report that has been presented. Thank you so much for dedicating it to 50% of the population in the world. It is what we deserve. How can we help economy grow, and how we can eliminate many of these discriminations? What I like the most is that it talked about gender transformation and not cross-cutting or transversalization. What we have to do is precisely transformation. And what the conclusions have proposed is precisely transformative. And I hope that we can work with rural women, jointly with them. And these are the ones who need it the most and the ones who have least support too. So it's a wonderful approach, and I'm very happy that for the first time, these rural women who have left their country have gotten together in the south of Chile to discuss on how to continue working. We believe that the general situation of women in the agri-food systems is quite clear, and in the non-agri-food topics too, because the pandemic has led to the loss of jobs, and women play a key role, not only in the production and the supply and trading, but also the quality of the products that reach our tables. Social standards are discriminatory in agri-food systems that do create power imbalances, but also limit the growth possibilities of the countries and also the growth possibility of women. And that is why, for us, it is critical to remove this barrier in access to the inputs, capital, technology, as well as the technical inputs. Agricultural situations normally are not for women. They say, no, this is not a woman's topic. This is a man's topic. And many women have said this. They don't have access because of many of these cultural topics, because those who work in the ministries do not see them as people that are subjected to receiving this technical knowledge. And these are the barriers that we have to try and avoid. And also access to land. Our region does not have discriminatory legal standards in terms of access to land, unless it's within a marital society. There are discriminatory regulations that we're trying to solve so that there is no longer discrimination when it comes to access to land. But there is a lack of access to loans and credit, 25% less than men. And when we talk about technology, it's 90% less, even 98% less. So we have a lot of work to do in order to remove those discriminations and that lack of access to capital, which does not allow them to grow in terms of their production. And one of the topics that we're most interested in and that we're trying to promote for some time, which is one of the topics from the 15th Regional Women's Committee, was care. Because we're talking about the society of care, because we're talking about transformation, where women is at the center, not only the care of people, but also the planet. And I would like to highlight here the horizon, which is highlighted by the report. How can we move forward with a special focus on acknowledging a community caregivers who are rural and who have less access to some of these public and private services. That's why they are a key factor, a key element for the economy, for women, for gender equality, and also important for recovery. In the rural spaces, we can be inspired on some of these care cooperatives, which are a great example to help us in the reflection of inclusive policies that must work in the territory. There is still a lot to be done from the state and from public policies. We require comprehensive, integral policies that allow us to take care of this crisis of care. From UN Women, we believe it is important to signify, to have a new meaning and identifying these women that are indispensable for supporting the agri-food security. I would like to insist also on the importance of putting together a more robust regular the role that rural women play in the agri-food systems. This has been the objective of the conclusions agreed by 193 countries from the United Nations in the the SSW number 92, which took place in 2018 in order to achieve the challenges of providing empowerment and equality of women in the rural sector. And I would also like to highlight recommendation number 39, which was approved by the Convention on the Elimination of Discrimination, which was approved last year with a huge support of UN Women. Our region is very active in promoting the positioning and reflecting the contribution of rural women, as well as the urgency of responding to the development problems related to sustainability of agri-food systems and human rights that affect mostly women. SSW number 92 had the policies that governments should undertake and that the private sector should undertake in three areas: reinforcing the legal framework for rural women, applying economic and social policies for the empowerment of rural women, and strengthening the collective voice, leadership, and decision-making of all women and rural girls. And I was saying the Regional Conference for Women that took place in November last year positioned the need of building comprehensive care systems at the regional level and promoting the participation of women in these rural cooperatives to support care. Now, in closing, I would like to highlight the need of strengthening networks and relationships, starting with the United Nations, and that's why I celebrate being here, supporting strategic alliances with civil society and movements of the civil society that are critical so that the voice of rural women can be heightened and can be heard throughout the region. The academia, governments, public and private foundations, where rural women must be placed at the center. Now, in terms of statistical data, as was highlighted, the importance of having this data in order to develop policies, we have a process that dates back 23 years, strengthening the gender statistics. It's called the Aguascalientes process. We normally have the process in the city of Aguascalientes in Mexico, and it would be extremely important that next year we dedicate to rural women statistics. So I would like to invite you to think about this to see how we can continue moving forward, trying to make them even broader. Now, for us, evidently, a new social political agreement, contract, putting rural women at the center, strengthening our commitment to rural women is critical, because only if we do that, we're not going to be leaving anyone behind, and we're going to be working with those who really want to stay, want to remain, but oftentimes it is the lack of employment, the economic situation, and the lack of access to all of this stated by the report does not allow them to. So thank you so much for having invited us, and we'll remain here to continue with this dialogue and conversation. Thank you, Maria Noel. We do have a common agenda to move forward with. Now, I would like to leave the floor for the Q&As that we have been receiving. The first one is, where can we find the report? Ricardo is providing us with support with that information on the chat pod in the streaming. So you will have that information available there. And then we have a question for Benjamin. Given this adverse scenario of increasing gender inequalities, which are the main actions in terms of public policies that governments should implement? Please, Benjamin, if you could help us address that. Yes, well, thank you so much for the comments made by the other members of the panel and for these questions. Well, actions. In the report, we try to identify some actions. First of all, the report is based on evidence. It's based on data and analysis. There's so much more that we would like to say regarding the topics, but we have limited ourselves because it's data-based. So recommendations that we have made are the ones that have the support in terms of studies and analysis. Because that we have seen have had impact. But there's a whole set of things. One of the main ones is, as was just said, going from mainstreaming to explicit actions focused on the heart of the problem. So we see that there has been an important increase in talking about this. Yes, we talk about women, but when we get down to what really the policies are actually doing, the effort, there's very little being done, very scarcely monitored, and not quite visible either. So that's why we've carried out this exercise to see this with data, to see whether we could go just from talking about gender into actually integrating that. That would have a real impact in many aspects, but that is based on the impact assessment that they have carried out. It is also very important to go from policies that are focused on unique areas towards policies that are actually transformative, that look for which are the other factors that imply that women cannot truly take advantage so that they can get more resources, because there are so many other factors. It's not just cultural and social that have an impact and that limit it and make it a lot more difficult for them. It's critical to have this broader scope when looking at policies. We've also identified some policies that can be key, for example, care management, and the fact that women have a larger burden in that sense when it comes to house chores, taking care of the children and the elderly also, and that also limits their capacity to equally participate in economy and in development in general. So acknowledging this link, acknowledging these limits is critical in order to help women to truly participate. Again, also, we've identified actions like focusing on the owning land and all of the impacts that can, all of the positive impacts that can also have. And also focusing on impact itself, because this empowerment has many other indirect impacts on the well-being of the family, the community, well, and women themselves too. So these are some of the elements that come to mind. Thank you so much for answering that question. We have one question here for Maria Noel Baeza. Indigenous women face inequalities that are profound. What is the key in order to consider their empowerment? If maybe you could give us your vision. Yes, thank you so much for that question. And one of the keys is precisely regulatory. We need to check the regulations that we have for access to capital, to land, and to other inputs. As a lawyer, I know that I need the law, and I believe that those standards, those laws, include more specifically things that are out there. And that's why recommendation number 39 states precisely these topics and the discrimination points that we need to do away with. And there's also another critical point here, which are the social standards. Within indigenous communities, there is a lot of violence against women, psychological, but also physical violence and economic violence that does not allow rural indigenous women to truly develop. So those regulations, those social standards that fall under a culture which is not real, because culture evolves, and we can see that every single day. And that cultural evolution has also got to reach indigenous communities. Indigenous women talk to us about all of the problems that they face on a daily basis. But once they leave that circle of violence, they have a development and economic autonomy that no one can stop them. And that's what we have to achieve. For them to leave that violent culture from that normal down-looking, which puts them in non-leadership positions. And that's why it's so important that indigenous women should hold leadership positions so that they can show how wonderful they are. Just yesterday in the social and economic forum that we are celebrating at ECLAC, we had a wonderful indigenous woman who is a lawyer who was telling us how difficult it was for her to be accepted in her own community. But that's precisely what we need to work on. That work on changing the social standards, which does not only depend on the state, it depends on every single one of us. Well, and obviously then community care, which is fundamental and clear. We know that indigenous women work 6 to 8 times more than men. We're saying then that an indigenous woman in a community works 250 days throughout the year, and the man only works 60. And that is simply unacceptable. We cannot continue without men's co-responsibility for non-remunerated chores and tasks. And we need to value that time. We need to value and appreciate those actions. And that's why we're doing surveys based on time. What do rural women use their time in? And women in general, really. And we've just presented this in Uruguay, 23% of the GDP. That is to say, countries grow on the shoulders of women and for free, and especially on rural women. And that's what we have to change. Regulatory changes, cultural and social aspects, access to input so that rural women can actually demonstrate their full potential. Thank you, Maria Noel. And now, to close, we would like to invite Luis Bedushi, Senior Policy Officer and leader of the Regional Initiative number 2 for FAO for Latin America and the Caribbean, to give us his final reflection.
Thank you. It's really a pleasure being here in this activity. And I'd like to thank Catalina for organizing this whole thing, besides the team. I had several talking points, some ideas, but let me say that some ideas in the discussion are very important. FAO and in the region. That's why we insist so much on having Ben here in a very intense week with the Economic and Social Forum. I would like to thank Luz Haro in Coyhaique. Catalina was there on Monday. We will continue to work with you, Luz, even your proposal of emphasizing the role of rural women. And Maze, thank you for being with us. Maze discussed the Marcha das Margaridas. We committed to work together. I'd like to extend the invitation to UN Women, but this is a call so that these topics are part of the political agenda and are translated into specific actions. Like Ben said, it's important to have reports, these type of reports, to continue to show that even though that we are doing something, but this is not enough. This idea of being more explicit around the action and as a regional leader, Maya, she's always calling us to emphasize on those messages. How can we discuss in the next FAO regional meeting in Georgetown in April next year? These ideas are also part of a narrative that puts the subject at the center of policies. This is a significant change, and the data show the importance, the ethical importance of closing these gender gaps, but also it shows the opportunities we are living on the table. So this group here, and all of you in the streaming, nearly 500 people, we have to take the commitment in the different fora, such as the Decade of Family Farming, to work together, hand in hand with the other agencies. I'd like to thank you, Maria Noel, for being here, the social movements and government, to be more explicit on the commitment closing these gender gaps that are preventing us to build more thriving, influential, and sustainable rural societies. Thank you, Catalina, for the organization, and back to you. Thank you. Thank you, Luis. I'd like to thank everyone, our speakers today, and of course, all of you in the streaming. I'd like to thank you for paying attention to rural women's situation, for the commitment to gender equality in the rural environment. Thank you for joining, and we will be in touch around gender equality. Have a good day.